And this particular segment is my segment. It's titled 10 Garden Hacks for Small Plot Gardening. And I'm speaking from the perspective here of small plot being somewhere in the range of 100 square feet to 1,000 square feet. And maybe you can relate to this. I had a moment in 2009 when I was feeling really disconnected from my food and my community, and I really felt like a tourist in my own life, and I knew that growing food was going to help me find that happiness again. And I knew this because when I grew up, I spent so much time with my mom outdoor in her garden, and that time I felt so connected to the earth, and picking fresh food right off the vine each day and having homegrown meals on the table. I just remember feeling really connected to everything, and I wanted that back in my life. So it's a lot of joy, right? And because I never do anything just partway, I probably could have just started a garden, but instead I decided to become an urban farmer because I generally make really big life changes fast. And so, not everybody needs to be an urban farmer. Gardening provides all that same joy of growing food, and that might be something that you can relate to. So basically, I started growing food in Brooklyn, and I have grown in containers indoors and in my own backyard. And then I've grown in backyards. I've actually farmed a backyard and sold produce to all the neighbors. And then I also helped to create a 1-acre youth farm. And all of these experiences of growing in small spaces and also in farming has led me to become obsessed with creating systems that take advantage of every little inch, that pack in the most amount of food in the smallest amount of space. So getting, the most out of my gardens. And my questions are, how can we grow more food in less space? How can we partner with Mother Nature so we grow food in less time and with less outside resources, use what we have locally? And how can we enjoy our time in our gardens so we become lazy gardeners? And one note is that I prefer soil. And that's what you're going to hear me talk about in general. Some of these tips would apply to other systems, but most of what I talk about will be soil-based. And I work with soil because I think that's our path to reversing climate change, by building soil and by putting that carbon back into the soil. So that's why I choose soil personally, and that's the perspective that I'm coming from. And during this summit, you're going to hear speakers come from lots of different perspectives. They might be in a rural setting with lots of space. They might be in an urban setting with a very small community garden. And so it's important to understand that their hacks might work in a very particular location. So you want to understand the perspective that they're coming from. So that's why I'm sharing where I'm coming from. And at the end of every summit presentation, I'm going to be live on the phone answering your questions, and we can sort out if there's any conflicting gardening advice, and I know there will be some among these speakers. We'll sort out why one speaker might say one thing and why another speaker might say something else. And that's the exciting thing in this summit, is the diversity of voices. All right, so before I get started with the 10 garden hacks for small plot growing, I would recommend that you take a moment and think about where you spend most of your time while you're growing food. So do you have that picture in your mind right now? So where are you spending time? Now, where you want to focus most of your energy is on 6 activities that have the most impact when you're growing food. And those are seeding, transplanting. Without those 2, you don't get any food because you haven't planted anything, right? Harvesting. Without harvesting, you're not eating anything. So very important to spend a lot of time harvesting. Pruning and trellising, because pruning and trellising signals to Mother Nature that we're here to support the process of her growing even more food for us. So pruning and trellising, number 4. Number 5, soil fertility. So like I said, I'm a soil-based person, so spending time cultivating that soil, getting to know that soil is going to pay off in the long run. And finally, record keeping. And I'm going to talk about that one in the garden hack today, and you'll see why it's so important. All right, so those are the activities that produce the most amount of food in my experience. So find ways to spend most of your time there and spend as little time as possible on all the other things, right? So that's what these hacks are meant to help you do. So keep that in mind. Here are 10 garden hacks for small plot growing, for soil small plot growing. Garden hack number 1. Our health starts with the soil, so this first hack, it has to do with soil. So the number one thing that you can do to ensure that you get the most out of your garden year after year and that you continuously recycle nutrients is you want to make sure you add at least 2 inches of compost each year to your planting beds. So this is, when you're growing in small plot beds and you don't have animals running around dropping manure, you want to be adding those nutrients back into the soil every season, because if you're growing biointensively and you're growing a lot of food, those nutrients are going up into the plants and you need to make sure that it comes back down into the soil. So compost is the way that happens, right? Our compost is where that carbon and nitrogen break down and then we add it back into the soil. And so what you want to do every season, 2 inches of compost across all the top of your planting beds. And what I recommend is, if you're somebody who is also doing cover crops for the winter or even summer cover crops, that's okay. You can chop and drop those as well if that's something that you're familiar with. Basically what that means is it's called green manure. And basically you have crops that you're growing specifically to add nutrients back into the soil. And when they get to a certain height, you chop them down and you lay them down as mulch and they break down back into the soil. And that's the whole process by which the soil has enough nutrients to then feed the next round of crops, which is what feeds us our healthy plants, right? So for all of you beginners out there, the number one thing that you can do for soil fertility is 2 inches of compost every year across all of your planting beds. Don't question it, do it. You'll be very happy you did. And there's multiple reasons. So not only are you recycling nutrients, but when you add compost, you're conditioning your soil. So compost improves the texture of any soil. So if you have a clay-like soil, it improves it. If you have a sandy soil, this improves your soil. So compost is magic. For that reason, it improves the texture of your soil. The other thing that compost does is it improves the water retaining capacity of your soil. So what that means is that you don't have to irrigate quite as much when you have this compost in the soil. So this is the number one hack to good soil, to plant health, and to nutrients coming into your body through your food. So I can't underscore this enough. I say this in all of my trainings, and I have to include it as the number one garden hack. Garden hack number 2. Bring the soil up to your level. So this is a really great hack for people who maybe have physical limitations and can't necessarily bend over a lot and do the gardening work. Or this is good for lazy gardeners who, in general, don't want to bend over. So bring that garden soil up to you. And you can do this in a couple different ways. One is building raised beds that are very tall. And I've seen anything up to 3 feet, and that people can stand and plant. I've seen, they look like desks, where basically it's a grow bed that a handicap accessible chair can roll under, so the person can garden, can roll their chair up and then garden around them. So I've seen those, so look into those. And then I've seen hugelkultur beds, which is a raised bed made with wood. And on this summit, I'm not going to go into it here because Paul Wheaton does a fabulous job. And you can grow a hugelkultur bed that's like 6 feet tall. So you could just make sure that everything that you want to harvest is at that top level. And another way to bring the soil to you is to have a tool that reaches to the ground. And so there are 2 tools that I know of that make standing and gardening much easier. One is a collinear hoe, and this is a tool for early spring weeding when weeds are very, very little tiny, teeny tiny. And what this does is it's a tiny tool that fits in between your crops, and it cuts through the top quarter layer of soil, so it doesn't interrupt all the soil biology way below the soil, but just that top layer of soil, and basically cuts all of the weed sprouts in half. The roots die and the tops dry up in the sunlight, and you have a no weed bed. So that's one tool, a stand-up tool. And the other tool that I've seen that's super cool, I haven't tried them, I would love to hear your comments if you've tried this, is a stand-up transplanter. So, farmers for years have tractors where they have a big rolling transplanter. They have all these seedlings on a tractor, and as it rolls, it shoots them into the ground. So there are versions of this for gardens as well, and it's a handheld. It almost looks like a jackhammer, and basically you slide the transplant in and you pop it into the ground. So those are different ways that you can bring the soil up to your level so that you don't always have to be bending over. For me, I enjoy the workout, so that's another way to think of it, is if you do enjoy the workout, then use this as a time to practice your squats and to move sideways and to practice your lunges. Get your workout in so you don't have to go to the gym. Garden hack number 3. Let Mother Nature do some of the work reseeding for you. And in a small space, there are very particular plants where this makes sense. So if you had a really large space, you could let any one of your plants go to seed, because with a large space, you have enough space that you can let things sit in the ground for a while. But in a smaller space, you're trying to fit in as many crops as you can and as many rotations as you can. And so when something is done, you want to pull it out and you want to put something else in right away so that you can get the most amount of food out of your small space. So there's a little bit of friction there where you want to let some things reseed, but you want that space. It takes about in my experience, at least a month or two from a plant to go from fully mature, where you're harvesting that plant, to then seeding, where it's at a place where you can save the seeds from that plant. So that's a long time where you can't plant something in that space. But if you manage to plant it in the exact right location, you can have the best of both worlds. And here's what I mean by this. This is my hack. So what I like to do is, for the plants that I like to allow them to reseed themselves, typically these are my herbs. I do this with cilantro. I do it with dill, basil, parsley. Those are the big ones. And so what I like to do with those particular plants is I will plant them along the edges of my beds. And that way, when they get really large and they're going to seed, I can kind of tie them up near the edge of the bed and get them out of the way of all the other plants that I want to plant. So what I'll do is, let's say I grow a line of parsley along the edge of my bed. Well, I don't need all of those plants to reseed. I just need one, because just from one single parsley plant, you're going to have enough seeds to plant probably for the rest of your life. So the hack is, in your garden beds, the things that you want to let mature to the time when they're going to reseed, put them along the edge of the bed, and then basically lean them out over the edge of the bed, and then you have space to work in the soil and plant something else in the meantime. And you're going to leave that one plant, and you're going to pull out any other parsley plants and just let that one go to seed. And you can take this a step further. You can actually let it reseed itself and just let it mature to the time when the seeds are ready to drop into the soil. Or you could take it to the point where the seeds are ready to be harvested, and you could manually pull those seeds off of that plant. And it doesn't take much time. Here is a parsley plant, and I took all of this giant bowl of seeds off of this plant in something like 5 minutes. So it doesn't take much time at all for you to do it yourself. And if you want, Mother Nature will do it herself. That's what she's trying to do. She's trying to propagate. So those seeds will eventually fall off of that plant. Garden hack number 4. So speaking of that parsley plant, you want to include a lot of herbs and flowers in your vegetable gardens as one of your primary pest prevention strategies. So in a garden, you're going to have lots of biology. That is the nature of what we're doing. We have life just, coming out of our tomatoes, basically. So you want to increase the amount of bug activity in your garden, specifically this beneficial insect population, as a way to prevent those pests from eating your food. So you're bringing in predator population essentially. And beneficial insects, they love flowers and they love herbs. And what's brilliant about this is that it's good for you too, right? All of those herbs are medicinal. They're spices that make your food taste really great. So it's perfect to grow them right inside of your planting beds with all those vegetables. On top of that, if you grow flowers, there are things like sunflowers, which are food. There's things like echinacea, which are medicine. And then there's a whole host of other things like zinnias that are just beautiful and prolific, and they're food for the soul. And you can bring bouquets that are beautiful, and if you mix them with herbs, they smell delicious, and bring those into your house. And so you're just increasing the amount that you're getting out of your garden while preventing pests from eating the food that you're trying to grow as well. This is a number that has come over time with experimentation, but I found that about 30% of planting space in your vegetable beds, when you're dedicating that to herbs and to flowers, that you end up with way less pests. So that's a number that you could shoot for in your planting bed. Garden hack number 5. Plant double. There's no better way to double your yield than to put twice as many options into the ground. And so when you're planting double, I mean that you're seeding twice as much, or you are transplanting twice as much as you need. And here's what happens. Essentially, if you seed double what you need, let's say you have a low germination rate. Well, you've been protected. Now you have double in the ground, and maybe that helps your germination rate go up, right? So that could help you. You're basically betting against the statistics of growing food. And then if you're transplanting double, what you're doing is you maybe aren't sure which one's going to be the stronger plant. You put both in the ground, you space them closer than you would normally put them, and then you take out one of them partway through. When it looks like one of them is stronger, take the other one out and eat it in a salad or something as a baby plant. So you'll get an early harvest, and then you'll get a larger later harvest. So plant double and eat some baby food. Literally some baby food. And I should say baby plants. And the beautiful part about this is that seeds are prolific. We've looked at how many seeds you can get from one single plant. And so basically, planting double, if you are letting certain crops go to seed, then you're going to have an abundance of seeds to put in the ground. And they're not that expensive if you're buying them either. So growing food is a numbers game. And if you don't get a lot of food started as seeds and as transplants, then it's not going to make it through the process. So plant double. It's your best way to double your yield. Garden hack number 6. Learn to measure by using what you have right on your body. Your hand is a fabulous measuring tool. I know how big this is, I know how long my thumb is, and these are all measurements that are standard in a garden. So if you can measure using your hand, then you don't ever need a ruler in the garden. You don't ever need markers in the garden to help you know how to plant and how often to plant. You can just use what you have available, which is your hand. So here's for most people, this is the rule of thumb. We'll talk about the thumb first. So with your thumb, typically your thumbnail is 1/2 inch long. So for those of you on the metric system, this is really helpful to know, because you don't want to do all those conversions, right? And if you go from the tip of your thumb to your first knuckle, that's about 1 inch. So there you go, metric system. So that means that your thumb is 2 inches long. Now, what's really cool is when you're planting garlic, oftentimes it says plant 2 inches deep. Well, what I do is I grab the garlic, I go upside down with that garlic, and I push it down until my thumb is underground, and then I know it's 2 inches deep. easy to measure, right? So here's other ways that you can measure using your hand. So what I know is that this is 6 inches long. I know that this, when I bring my finger and my thumb into close to my fist, this is 4 inches. And then I know from experience, my thumb is 2 inches, this is 1 inch, this is half an inch, and on from there. So whenever I go to transplant anything, this makes it really easy. And the first time I ever transplanted my first garden beds, I had about 900 plants to get in the ground, and I was out there with a measuring stick trying to measure everything out. Oh man, it was such a nightmare. And so once I realized that I could just use my hand, then it became much faster. And once you start to get a sense of what the spacings look like, you won't even need your hands anymore. You can just look and you just know what the spacing is. And here's a little extra tip about spacing. So when you're planting, let's say something 6 inches apart, maybe it's lettuce heads. Let's say you have this space available and you're trying to figure out how many to fit in. You could go ahead and grid this out, right? And you could measure 6 inches and put little transplants in at the 6 inch marks. But if you look at it, you say, you know what? The diagonal between those plants is larger than 6 inches. So is there a way to pack more food into that space? And sure enough, there is. If you actually measure along the diagonal, sometimes you can offset plants and create diamond patterns, and you can fit in twice as many plants or a third, 1/3 more of the plants by doing this arrangement. So I highly recommend thinking about this when you're planting. Garden hack number 7. Record keeping. This is a big key to long-term efficiency. This is like a garden hack for long term. So what you want to do is create a plan at the start of the season, and then you want to execute the plan, and then you want to figure out a way to measure how well you did so that next year you can make improvements to the system. And all you have to do is rinse and repeat. That's the golden nugget here. That's the hack, that's the efficiency. Next year you just do the same thing, only make it better. You could grow twice as much next year. So here's what I mean by that. The one important thing that you want to track this year is harvest. So you want to have a harvest log, and all this is a list of all the different crops you're growing and how many pounds you grow every week. And you're going to harvest every week, right? So basically every week you weigh and you say this many pounds of brandywine tomatoes, this many pounds of cherry tomatoes, this many pounds of kale, whatever, all of your different crops. And what you're going to start to notice is weekly trends for some of your greens. How much greens can you produce every week from your plants? And you're going to be able to dial in and figure out exactly how many greens you need to grow to feed you and your family. And then you can get just the right amount of plants next year for that same crop. So that's really cool. The next thing you're going to learn is how much can I let's say I want to maybe sell some produce. I want to grow some for me and I want to give some away. Or maybe you want to preserve some food for the winter. So I want to grow some for the summer, but I want an excess so I can preserve it. So how many tomato plants do I need to plant? Well, if you know how many pounds you're growing every week, then you can find out how many you are eating each week and then how many you're able to preserve for the winter. So a couple of other trends you're going to see are year-to-year trends. So the first year growing tomatoes, you don't know if your numbers are good, bad, ugly, good, who knows, because you don't have anything to measure it against. Your specific location and your particular soil is different than anybody else's. So while there might be a range of numbers that people will tell you for tomato growing, and you might fall somewhere in that center point, you don't really know if you've maxed out your system until you've grown the second year and you've tried something new, right? So it's good year to year to know how many pounds you actually produced, because sometimes our memory is off. By the end of the year, you'll think, oh my God, I was overloaded with cherry tomatoes, but you don't actually have a number to compare it to next year. So keep that log so that you know exactly how much you grew. And you know how much to expect next year. And keep in mind year to year, in my first couple years of farming in Brooklyn, the first year we had a tornado, I believe it was. The second year was a hurricane. The third year was a hurricane. We had an ice storm come through, a hailstorm come through. And all of these things wiped out our crops. And so if I didn't have the data of those years, I wouldn't understand how much my yield was affected. So that shows me how much yield got taken out by wind blowing blossoms off my tomatoes. And then the other years where I didn't have that, then I know what what a full season looks like, right? So the other thing that you can learn from having a harvest log is, let's say you're doing some experiments, like you want to try to grow some lettuce in the shade. Well, if you grew some, let's say, arugula in the sun, and you know how many pounds of arugula you get from that spot, and then you try to grow in the shade, what you're going to find out is you're probably going to get about 50% less. That's about the numbers that I find. And the same thing goes for cabbage. I tried to experiment with my cabbage, and I grew cabbage in a shady spot and in a sunny spot. My sunny spot, all the cabbage came out at the 2-month mark, which was the days to maturity, 6 months. And the cabbage that was in the shade took 2 months longer to come in. So it took double the amount of time, and they were half as small. The yield was half as small. So this is why it's important to take data, because if you're looking at a shady spot, cabbage doesn't make a whole lot of sense because you had to wait so long for so little. But arugula makes a lot of sense because basically you got half the yield, but you only tacked on 1 or 2 extra weeks versus several months. So then you can grow more food in that location. You can take that out and plant something else. So you can't make decisions about how efficient you are and how much more food you could grow until you actually have data. And this is the garden geek in me telling you the one thing to do. Take a look at a harvest log. All it is your list of crops on the side, the list of weeks across the top, and just how much food is produced each week and harvested each week. And you'll start to understand how to make your system better for next year. So this hack may not pay off this year, but this hack might double your yield next year. Garden hack number 8. Harvest, 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 harvest. Please harvest weekly. What this does is it sends a signal to the plant that you are working with it, you are pruning off material, and basically what's going to happen is you're going to produce a surge of growth for that plant. It's going to photosynthesize to grow more. And so the more you harvest, the more food you get. And specifically for greens, this is true for your kales and your collards and all of those things that benefit by being clipped, herbs too. And when you pull fruit off of a vine, it'll send the signal to grow more fruit because the plant wants to propagate. So harvest, harvest, harvest. And don't be afraid to harvest deeply when you do harvest. So what I see happen with a lot of people's gardens is that they plant a herb, and in this case you can see some catnip. It's a lemon catnip, and it has grown wild into a very large area. And this person loves this catnip, and it could grow very prolifically and still get a massive haircut. So here's what I would recommend. Cut this plant way back to the edge of the bed. And by doing this, what you're doing, so you can do a couple things. One thing is that you can take all that herb that you are cutting off and you can dry it and save it for later. You can make teas with catnip. You can make smokable teas with catnip, all of which are medicinal, and catnip is good for digestion and some other things. So you could take all of this and turn it into medicine. And then look at all the space that we have uncovered that we can plant something else. And this catnip along the edge of the bed, again, our herbs all along those edges of the bed can hang out over the edge and allow more space for food inside the bed. So don't be shy when you're harvesting herbs. They grow like crazy. So just get on in there for things like oregano, things like thyme, things like sage, things like catnip that we're cutting here. Get in there and just cut it all down. It's going to grow back much faster than you think. And when you're harvesting greens, don't be afraid to go too deep. So look at this kale plant. It has a lot of leaves, and what's happening is that this particular person hasn't been harvesting regularly, and the lower leaves have turned brown. And so you're basically throwing food away that you've grown. It's kind of a waste. So make sure you harvest, get them off the plant. Don't wait to cook dinner and then go harvest. Basically, you could pull all of these leaves off and you can store them, be ready to cook them, and the plant meanwhile will be growing more, so you get double the yield. And if you're not eating it, you can always pass it along to a friend or a neighbor. So harvest, harvest, harvest. I recommend weekly harvest at least. Sometimes more for things like cherry tomatoes that come in full force. Harvest those like 3 times a week. Okra 3 times a week. Beans a couple times a week. Those are all things that will continue to fruit very readily. But greens and those sorts of things, once a week is plenty. But make sure you harvest them. Don't let them go bad. Garden hack number 9. Okay, so now you've harvested and you have all these greens. What do you do? Well, this is a simple hack, and you've probably seen this before. But essentially, when you take food out of the garden, you have to make sure that it stays good until you're going to eat it. And one of the ways that farmers take food out of the field and they make sure that it lasts a really long time in our refrigerators is they do what's called hydrocooling. And they will basically dunk those greens in water to take all the field heat out. And when you're harvesting, it's very beneficial to harvest in the early morning when everything is the coolest. And that means that the field heat in the vegetables will be the coolest, and it'll be easiest for those vegetables to last a long time in your refrigerator. So if you don't want to put them in your fridge because they start to wilt, this happens, right? So maybe you've seen this before. What you want to do is you want to take your greens and you can literally put them in a vase with some water, and that plant will continue, or those leaves will continue to pull water up out of that vase, and that will continue to cool those vegetables, and they will stay nice and perky, and when you go to eat them, they will be delicious. So super easy trick for all of your greens. This works for chard, collards, kale, callaloo. This even works for a lot of our herbs like basil. A lot of people will buy, giant things of basil at the store and stick it in water in order to keep it. And so you don't want to put basil in your fridge. You want to stick it in some water to keep it from going bad. So these are some ways to extend the life of your produce once you harvest it, because face it, you got to get that food off the plant into your kitchen. And if you don't get it off, then you're not getting food in the field. So this is a way to keep that flow happening and to make sure that you're using all that food. And like I said, if you can't use it, there's neighbors, there's friends. Garden hack number 10. Eat your weeds. There's some things that we don't want to spend any time on in the garden, and one of them is weeding. And so there are ways to stay ahead of weeding and make sure you don't ever have to do it. One of them is to eat your weeds when they are babies. And there are lots of edible weeds in the garden. Purslane, there's lamb's quarter, there's dandelion. Those are 3 of my favorites, and they show up almost everywhere where I grow food. So they are great for salads, and all you want to do is snip them into a bowl in order to make a salad. In some cases, I'll pull them out by the roots completely and not snip them into the bowl. But if I pull them out by their roots, then they're not going to grow back. And so you have to make that decision whether or not you want them to be totally eradicated out of your space or whether you want some mini salad greens for later. And so I oftentimes just snip them out. And the reason why I snip them out is that one of my other weed strategies, this is a little bonus, is that I plant really, really densely. And so what happens over time is that I get a green canopy layer, and the sun can't reach the soil, which means the weed seeds can't germinate. And so once that plant layer happens, I don't get weeds anymore. So weeds are usually like an early spring thing for me. And so I just clip them down into a bowl, and I just let the roots stay there because they aren't going to be a problem throughout the season because they won't have any space or sunlight to grow. So that's one of my big strategies to avoid weeding, is to make lots of weed salads in the springtime and then basically grow a big, large green canopy, super densely planted, no more weeds. So there you go, garden hacks for small plot soil farming. And like I mentioned earlier, the things that you want to focus your energy on are these 6 activities: seeding, transplanting, harvesting, pruning and trellising, soil fertility, record keeping. Those are the things that are going to be impactful. They're going to help you grow as much food as possible. And anything that helps you do more of that and less of something else, like irrigation or weeding or mulching, all things that are important, but that maybe you spend the least amount of time as possible. Anything that can focus your energy on these 6 things is going to be a hack that is going to produce a lot of food.